I'm Isabella, 26, female, and he cheated and bragged about it, so I made sure his mom found out. That might sound harsh, even vindictive, but after 5 years of building a life with Daniel, of picturing our future intertwined, his betrayal felt like a physical blow, a shattering of everything I thought was real, and the bragging. That was the salt in the deepest wound. It wasn't enough for him to break my heart. He had to parade his deceit like some kind of trophy. Our history was, at least from my perspective, one of steady growth and genuine affection. We met in college, a whirlwind of late-night study sessions and shared dreams. He was charming, ambitious, and seemed genuinely smitten. Over the years, we built a comfortable life together. We talked about marriage, about buying a house, about the family we might one day have. I even developed a wonderful relationship with his mother, Mrs. Thompson. She was warm, supportive, and always made me feel like part of their family. "You're such a good influence on Daniel, Isabella," she'd often say, her eyes crinkling at the corners when she smiled. "He's so lucky to have you." I cherished those moments, the feeling of belonging, of being truly accepted. Looking back, there were subtle red flags, little inconsistencies that I, in my trusting naivety, chose to ignore. A late night at work that stretched into the early morning with no explanation. A sudden protectiveness over his phone, a shift in his usual routines. But I loved him, and I believed in us. I dismissed my nagging doubts, attributing them to stress or my own insecurities. Mrs. Thompson often spoke about Daniel's occasional immaturity when he was younger, little things. But I always thought he had outgrown those tendencies with me. Two specific instances now stand out, sharp and clear, in my memory. Once, a mutual friend mentioned seeing Daniel at a bar across town with a woman I didn't know. But Daniel smoothly explained it away as a chance encounter with a colleague. Another time, I found a stray earring in his car that was definitely not mine, and he swore it must have belonged to a friend he'd given a ride to. Each time, I believed him, desperate to preserve the image of the man I thought I knew. The truth unraveled not in one dramatic confrontation, but through a series of insidious whispers. It started with a cryptic message from an anonymous social media account, simply stating, "You deserve to know the truth about Daniel." Initially, I dismissed it as a malicious prank, but then came another message and another, each containing vague but unsettling details. My unease grew, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. Then, a friend who had seen Daniel out with another woman couldn't hold her silence any longer. She approached me, her face etched with sympathy, and gently told me what she had witnessed. The details she provided matched the anonymous messages, painting a picture of intimacy and affection with someone who was definitely not me. The denial I had so carefully constructed began to crumble. The final, irrefutable blow came unexpectedly. Daniel had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter. A message notification popped up on the screen, a conversation with one of his friends. Curiosity, mixed with a growing sense of dread, overwhelmed me. I clicked on the message. What I read sent a wave of nausea and disbelief crashing over me. It wasn't just that he was cheating, it was the callous, boastful way he described it. He detailed his encounters, referring to them as easy wins and bragging about how he was juggling multiple women. Without me suspecting a thing, he even mocked my trust and devotion. The casual cruelty in his words was like a knife twisting in my heart. Replaceable, that single word echoed the sentiment of his messages. I felt a strange disconnect, as if I were watching a movie of my own life. The man I loved, the man I had planned a future with, was a complete stranger. The betrayal was deep and agonizing, but the bragging, the utter lack of remorse or respect, ignited a different kind of pain, a fierce, burning anger. Confronting Daniel was inevitable. When he walked in that evening, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me, I was waiting. I didn't scream or cry, though the urge was overwhelming. I simply showed him the messages on his laptop. His face paled, his initial bravado dissolving into a pathetic attempt at denial. He stammered excuses, tried to downplay the conversations as just guy talk, but the proof was undeniable. What truly shattered any remaining semblance of the man I thought I knew was his complete lack of remorse. Instead of genuine contrition, I was met with defensiveness and a chilling nonchalance. "Look, Isabella," he said, his tone shifting to one of annoyed impatience. "It just happened. It doesn't mean anything. You're overreacting." He even had the audacity to suggest that I was being insecure, and that his little flings shouldn't threaten our real relationship. It was the bragging that cut deepest, the casual dismissal of my feelings, the arrogant assumption that he could betray me so flagrantly and face no real consequences. It wasn't just the infidelity, it was the utter disrespect. The blatant disregard for the years we had spent together. In that moment, something shifted within me. The heartbroken sadness began to morph into a cold, hard resolve. He thought he could cheat and brag about it. He thought he could treat me with such contempt and get away with it. He was wrong. My mind, reeling from the shock and anger, started to formulate a plan. A plan that wasn't about yelling or screaming or begging for an apology. I knew would never be sincere. It was about making him face the consequences of his actions in a way that would truly sting. And the person whose opinion Daniel valued above almost anyone else, his mother. He might have thought he was a smooth operator with his friends, but he still craved his mother's approval. That was his weakness, and I knew exactly how to exploit it. My focus shifted from emotional turmoil to meticulous planning. I knew that to convince Mrs. Thompson, I needed more than just my word. I needed irrefutable proof of Daniel's cheating and, crucially, his bragging. Over the next few days, while Daniel likely assumed I was wallowing in heartbroken misery, I was quietly gathering evidence. I meticulously documented the messages I had seen on his laptop, taking screenshots and saving them securely. I reached out to the friend who had seen him with another woman, and she was willing to provide me with specific details, dates, and even descriptions. I even managed to subtly inquire with a couple of mutual acquaintances about Daniel's recent behavior, and they inadvertently confirmed his boastful attitude about his conquests. It turned out he had been far more open about his infidelity than I had ever imagined. As the first pieced together the puzzle of his betrayal, the anger inside me solidified. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a pattern of deceit and disrespect. The bragging amplified the hurt, turning it into a burning desire for justice. Mrs. Thompson had always been so kind to me, so genuinely fond. I couldn't reconcile the image of the caring woman I knew with the thought of her son behaving in such a callous and dishonorable way. I felt a responsibility not just to myself, but also to her, to reveal the truth about the man she had raised. The evidence I collected painted a clear and damning picture. The screenshots of his messages were particularly damning, his own words dripping with arrogance and a complete lack of regard for our relationship. I knew that when Mrs. Thompson saw them, she would see the true character of her son, stripped bare of the charming facade he usually presented. Deciding how to approach Mrs. Thompson was crucial. I didn't want to come across as simply trying to cause trouble or seeking revenge out of spite. I wanted her to understand the depth of Daniel's betrayal and the disrespect he had shown, not just to me, but to the values she had instilled in him. I called Mrs. Thompson and asked if I could come over for tea, using the guise of wanting to talk about some difficult personal issues. She readily agreed, her warm and concerned tone immediately putting me at ease. Even amidst my nervous anticipation, when I arrived at her house, she greeted me with a hug, her usual cheerful demeanor slightly subdued. Sensing my distress, we sat down in her cozy living room, a familiar space filled with family photos and comforting trinkets. I started slowly, carefully, explaining that something serious had happened between Daniel and me. My voice wavered slightly as I spoke about discovering his infidelity. Mrs. Thompson listened intently, her expression shifting from concern to shock. Then, the hardest part, I gently explained that it wasn't just the cheating, but also the way Daniel had behaved afterward, his complete lack of remorse, and the fact that he had been bragging about it. I hesitated for a moment before pulling out the printed screenshots of his messages. I laid them on the table between us. Mrs. Thompson, I said softly, I wanted you to see this, to understand the full extent of what has happened. She picked up the papers, her hands trembling slightly as she read. Her eyes scanned the crude and boastful words, her face paling with each line. The cheerful warmth that usually radiated from her was replaced by a look of profound sadness and disbelief. A heavy silence filled the room as she finished reading. When she finally looked up at me, her eyes were filled with tears. "Oh, Isabella," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. I had no idea. Mrs. Thompson was heartbroken, not just for me, but also for the son she had raised. The Daniel she knew, or thought she knew, was not the callous and disrespectful person revealed in those messages. She was deeply ashamed and utterly disappointed. "I am so sorry, Isabella," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I am so incredibly sorry that Daniel has treated you this way. This is not the man I raised him to be." She couldn't bring herself to make excuses for him, didn't try to downplay his behavior. She simply acknowledged the pain he had caused and expressed her profound regret. She asked me questions, not to pry, but to understand. She wanted to know how long this had been going on, how I was feeling. I answered honestly, sharing the years of trust and love that had been shattered by his actions. I told her about the dreams we had shared, the future we had planned that now lay in ruins. After I had shared everything, Mrs. Thompson sat in silence for a long moment, her gaze distant. Then she looked at me with a newfound resolve in her eyes. I need to talk to him, she said firmly. He needs to understand the gravity of what he has done. Not just to you, Isabella, but to himself, to our family. She thanked me for telling her. For being honest, she said that while it was painful to learn the truth, she would rather know than continue to live under a false impression. As I left her house that day, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I had done what I needed to do. I had exposed Daniel's true character to the person whose opinion mattered most to him. The consequences were now in her hands. The confrontation between Daniel and his mother was, as I later heard from Mrs. Thompson herself, devastating. She didn't yell or scream. Her disappointment was conveyed in a quiet, firm voice, each word carrying the weight of a mother's shattered pride. She showed him the messages, forcing him to confront the vulgarity and disrespect he had so casually displayed. Daniel, initially defiant, crumbled under his mother's unwavering disappointment. He tried to make excuses, to downplay his actions, but she wouldn't allow it. She spoke about the values she had instilled in him, the importance of respect and honesty, and how deeply he had betrayed those principles. The consequences were swift and significant. Mrs. Thompson made it clear that she could not condone his behavior. She told him that she was ashamed of him and that their relationship would need to change. While she didn't completely cut him off, she established firm boundaries and made it clear that her trust in him was severely damaged. The easy acceptance and unwavering support he had always taken for granted were gone. Word of the confrontation and the reasons behind it eventually filtered back to some of Daniel's friends. The bragging stopped. The admiration he had sought for his conquest turned into whispers and awkward silences. He had underestimated the power of his mother's opinion and the ripple effect of his own callousness. As for me, knowing that Daniel had faced a reckoning, not just from me but from his own family, brought a sense of closure. It wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. It was about him facing the consequences of his actions in a way that truly resonated with him. I moved on, focusing on healing and rebuilding my life. The pain of the betrayal lingered, but it was no longer all-consuming. I had my dignity, and I knew that I had done the right thing. Sometimes, the most impactful way to make someone face their mistakes is to reveal their true character to the people they care about the most. After listening to today's story, perhaps it has raised some new questions in your mind. Every day on Reddit, new experiences and moments create fresh stories. We are all human. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share it. Thank you for your time. And don't forget to keep an eye out for more stories coming soon.